I can still hear the fluorescent lights humming in that boardroom. Not the expensive kind of hum, the cheap, flickering buzz that tells you the building is older than the company's ambitions. The conference table was that fake wood laminate that's supposed to look professional but just feels cold under your palms when you're trying not to shake. I'd practiced the pitch 17 times. Timed it. Refined the deck. Built a working prototype that lived on a single USB drive in my jacket pocket, the same pocket where I used to keep breath mints for our Monday morning stand-ups. He was my boss. More than that, my mentor, or so I'd believed for 3 years. The person who'd hired me, promoted me, told me I had instincts and execution chops and all those things that make you feel seen in a startup where most people are just fighting to be remembered. I thought that meant something. I thought when I finally showed him what I'd been building, the SaaS solution that would automate the exact workflow bottleneck I'd watched our clients struggle with for 2 years, he'd see it the way I did. A gap in the market. A real answer. Something scalable. I got through slide 4 before he started smiling. Not the good kind of smile. The kind that reaches his eyes but doesn't mean warmth, it means he's already decided, and you're still talking. It's cute, he said, leaning back in his chair with that posture that takes up more space than it needs to. Really? I mean that. But it's not scalable. You're thinking too small. This is a feature, not a product. Maybe something we could bolt onto our existing platform in, I don't know, Q3 next year if we have bandwidth. But as a standalone? No. It's not what we do. Cute. The word sat between us like a stone. I opened my mouth to explain the user research, 43 interviews, 16 beta testers who'd begged for early access, the 3 potential customers who'd already asked about pricing, but he was already closing his laptop. I appreciate you bringing this to me, he said, and that was the tell. The past tense. The meeting was over, and the decision was final. I've spent 2 years on this. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Nights. Weekends. I built the entire MVP myself. I'm not talking about a feature, I'm talking about a solution our competitors don't have. The market's there. The validation's there. I just need. You need to trust me on this, he interrupted, and now the smile was gone. I've been in this industry for 12 years. I know what scales and what doesn't. This doesn't. I'm killing the project. He stood up. The meeting was over. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, though my throat felt like it might betray me. I just nodded, gathered my laptop, and slid the USB drive out of my pocket, the one I'd brought to show him the live demo, the one that held every line of code I'd written in secret, every pixel of the interface I'd designed in stolen hours after our actual product sprints ended. I held it in my hand as I walked out, feeling its weight. 3 grams of plastic and silicon that represented 730 nights of work, of belief, of thinking maybe this time someone would see me not as the executor but as the architect. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and the hallway was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, the kind that follows a laugh that wasn't meant for you. The kind that makes you wonder if you imagined your own voice. I stood there for a moment, thumb pressed against the USB drive's edge, and felt the fluorescent hum above me, relentless and indifferent. This wasn't just an idea he'd dismissed. It was 2 years of my life. It was every time I'd believed him when he said I had potential, every time I'd worked late to prove I belonged in the room where decisions got made. And he'd called it cute. I put the drive back in my pocket and walked to my desk. No one looked up. No one asked how it went. The office just kept moving, the way it always did, and I realized with a clarity that felt almost chemical, he would never build this. He would never believe in it. But that didn't mean it wasn't real. It just meant I'd been pitching to the wrong person. I didn't go back to the office for 3 days. Called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie, I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything vital from my chest and left only the mechanics. Breathing. Blinking. The kind of numbness that makes you forget to eat until your stomach hurts, and even then you just stare at the refrigerator like it's a puzzle you can't solve. On the third night, I opened my laptop. Not to work. I couldn't stomach the thought of logging into Slack, seeing his name in the channel list, pretending Tuesday's meeting hadn't happened. I opened it because I needed to prove to myself I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The idea. The validation. The market gap that felt so obvious it kept me awake at night with the kind of clarity that makes you think you finally found the thing you're supposed to do. I found the folder labeled Phase 1. I'd created it 18 months earlier, back when this was still just a hypothesis I was testing in secret. Inside, 43 screenshots of user interviews. 16 beta tester agreements, signed and scanned. 3 letters of intent from potential customers asking when they could pay for access. A spreadsheet with 200 names, people who'd said yes when I asked if they'd pilot a solution to the exact workflow problem he'd just called not scalable. I read through them, one by one. Paula from the logistics company who'd written, "This would save us at least 8 hours a week. Minimum." David from the marketing agency who'd said, "If you build this, we'll be your first customer. Just tell me when." Monica, who ran operations for a mid-sized SaaS company, who'd been so enthusiastic she'd introduced me to 4 other ops leads in her network, all of whom had said the same thing, "We need this, and no one's solving it." The data didn't lie. People do. People dismiss you, underestimate you, call your work cute when they mean inconvenient. But spreadsheets don't have egos. Screenshots don't gaslight you. The numbers were the same as they'd been before Tuesday, before the fluorescent hum and the fake wood table and the laugh that still sat in my chest like a bruise. I opened a new document. Titled it, Resolution. Not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because the difference mattered then and it matters now. Revenge is about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. Resolution is about proving something to yourself. One is backward-looking. The other is a door you walk through because staying still will kill you. If he wouldn't build it, I would. The thought arrived fully formed, not as hope but as fact. I had the prototype. I had the validation. I had the USB drive with 730 nights of code on it, and every line belonged to me. I'd written it on my own time, on my own laptop, using none of his company's resources because I'd known, even then, that I'd need to own it completely. I'd been preparing for this without realizing it. The NDA I'd signed when I started covered his company's intellectual property, not mine. I checked. Twice. I pulled up my savings account. $8,312. Not venture capital. Not a loan from family or a maxed-out credit card. Just 3 years of living below my means, skipping vacations, buying the store-brand groceries, saying no to the things that didn't matter so I could say yes to the one thing that did. It wasn't enough to quit my job. But it was enough to start. I gave myself 6 months. That felt both reasonable and terrifying, long enough to validate whether this could work, short enough that I couldn't hide from failure. 6 months to turn the prototype into a real product. To find customers. To prove that the gap I'd seen wasn't just visible to me, that the solution I'd built wasn't just a feature, and that the person who'd called it not scalable was wrong. The apartment was silent. No fluorescent hum, no conference room posturing, no voices telling me what I was capable of or what I wasn't. Just the quiet of my own space, my own decision, my own timeline. The silence I'd felt in that hallway 3 days ago, the awful, hollow kind, had shifted into something else. A workspace. A starting line. I opened a new tab and searched for how to file an LLC. Then another, SaaS pricing models for B2B. Then another, best no-code tools for landing pages. I didn't close the laptop until 4 in the morning, and when I finally did, the USB drive was sitting next to it, no longer a relic of rejection but the first piece of a plan. No more pitching. Just doing. And if it failed, at least it would fail on my terms. The irony didn't escape me. the company that had just dismissed my idea was built on my work. Not metaphorically. Literally. I'd coded the first MVP of their flagship product, the one that landed them their seed round, the one that got them into TechCrunch, the one that made him look like a visionary founder instead of a guy with a pitch deck and a LinkedIn network. Then, I was his right hand. That's what he called me in meetings, in Slack, in the all-hands where he'd gesture toward me and say, "None of this happens without her execution." Execution. Never vision. Never strategy. I built the architecture, debugged the critical path issues at 2 a.m, designed the user flow that became their signature feature. He built the story around it. He knew how to pitch. I knew how to ship. We were, he said, the perfect partnership. Except partnerships usually come with equity. I have the Slack messages saved. I didn't plan to keep them. I'm not the kind of person who documents every slight for future ammunition. But Slack auto-archives, and when I went looking for an old technical decision we'd made, I found them. Months of praise. "You're a machine. I don't know how you do it. This is why you're the MVP." Followed, always, by requests for more. "Can you take a pass at the investor deck design? You're better at this than anyone. Think you could hop on a call with that enterprise lead? They trust you. I need you to walk the new dev through the code base, no one knows it like you do." I said yes to all of it. I thought I was building something with him. Turns out I was building something for him. The term sheet came through on a Wednesday. Series A, $3.2 million, led by a firm I'd never heard him mention until the week before. He announced it in the all-hands with the energy of someone who'd summit Everest, talking about the team and our vision and what we've built together. I waited for my name. For some acknowledgement that the product those investors had just valued at $12 million wouldn't exist without the 7 months I'd spent architecting it while he networked and pitched. He thanked the ING team. The design team. His co-founder, who'd joined 6 months after I had. Then he moved on to roadmap. I checked the term sheet later. He'd send it to the leadership Slack channel, the one I wasn't in. I saw it because someone screenshotted the celebration and posted it in the general channel, and I zoomed in on the document visible in the background. His name. His co-founder's name. 3 advisors I'd never met. 0 equity allocated to early team members. 0 mention of the people who turned his vision into something investors could actually bet on. I asked him about it the next day, in his office, door closed. I saw the term sheet. "I'm not on the cap table." He looked genuinely confused, like I'd asked why I wasn't listed as the building owner. "You're an employee," he said. "You have a salary. A good one. And you'll get options in the next round when we formalize the employee pool. But right now, we can't dilute founder equity, it'll mess up the structure for future raises. I'm protecting you from founder risk. Trust me, you don't want to be on the hook if this thing goes sideways. Founder risk. As if the 60-hour weeks and the skipped weekends and the production bugs I'd fixed at midnight weren't risk. As if risk was something that happened to cap tables, not people. I didn't argue. I thanked him and walked out, the same way I'd walk out of the boardroom 6 months later, holding something that belonged to me and realizing it had never belonged to us. Now, he's raised Series A. His LinkedIn says, founder and CEO, under a headshot where he's wearing the quarter zip I used to see him wear to investor meetings. The company has 12 employees. They're hiring a VP of engineering. The job description mentions scaling our flagship product, the product I built, and I wonder if he even remembers that when he reads the resumes. Now, I'm unemployed. Technically, I quit 3 weeks after the boardroom meeting, which he accepted with what I can only describe as relief. No exit interview. No counteroffer. Just a Slack DM that said, "Totally understand. You've been a huge part of this. Let's stay in touch." Followed by a Calendly link for a coffee chat we both knew would never happen. I have 60 days. That's the other artifact I kept, the offer letter I signed 3 years ago, the one with the non-compete clause buried in section 7.3. It prohibits me from working on any product or service that competes with or could reasonably be construed to compete with the company's current or planned offerings, for 6 months after separation. I counted the days. Marked the calendar. June 14th. That's when the clock runs out, when I'm legally free to build in the same market he's in, the same market he told me wasn't big enough for my idea. 60 days to prepare. 60 days to make sure that when the non-compete expires, I'm not starting from zero, I'm starting from ready. He thought he was protecting me from risk. He never considered that he might need protection from me. The Slack messages are still in my archive. The term sheet screenshot is saved in a folder labeled Receipts. I don't plan to use them, but I keep them anyway, the same way you keep a map of where you've been so you remember why you left. The non-compete had 60 days left, but I didn't wait. Legal limbo became my advantage. I couldn't launch, but I could build. And if I was going to do this, I'd do it the way he never expected, quietly, methodically, without a single announcement or LinkedIn post or pitch deck sent to people who'd ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Stealth mode wasn't about hiding. It was about control. He'd built his company in public, courting investors and press and anyone with a platform who'd amplify his story. Every funding round came with a TechCrunch article. Every product update got a launch tweet thread. Every hire was celebrated like a conquest. Noise was his strategy, and it worked, until it became the only thing people remembered about him, the performance louder than the product. I chose silence. The strategy was simple, at least on paper. Validate the MVP with real users. Secure 3 beta clients who'd pay, even if it was just pilot pricing. File the LLC so everything I built was protected. Then, the day the non-compete expired, launch. Not with a press release or a product hunt campaign, but with a working product and revenue and proof that the market he dismissed was real. 90 days to make it happen. 12 weeks. That's what I gave myself before the legal clock ran out, and if I couldn't validate the idea in that window, maybe he'd been right after all. I started with the domain. Not my name, I wasn't that bold yet, but a holding name that wouldn't trigger any alarms if someone went searching. I registered it through a privacy service for $14, late on a Thursday night, sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles from my apartment because paranoia had become a feature, not a bug. He knew where I lived. He dropped off birthday cupcakes once, back when we were still pretending we were friends. I didn't trust him not to check in, the way mentors do when they think you've made a mistake they can fix. The Stripe account took longer. I'd never set one up before, and the verification process wanted business details I didn't have yet, EIN, bank account, articles of incorporation. I researched LLCs for 3 hours, reading state filing requirements and debating whether to pay the extra $150 for expedited processing or wait the standard 2 weeks. I paid. Time was the one resource I couldn't manufacture, and every day I spent waiting was a day I wasn't building. $847 total, $650 for the LLC filing and trademark application, $197 for expedited processing, $14 for the domain. I paid it from my savings account and watched the balance drop to $74.65. No investor pitch. No loans. Just the most expensive bet I'd ever placed on myself, documented in a transaction history I screenshotted and saved in a folder labeled Foundation. I built a Notion board the same night. Called it 90-Day Sprint. 3 columns, validate, secure, file. Under validate, user testing, feedback loops, MVP refinements. Under secure, outreach to beta prospects, pricing experiments, first 3 contracts. Under file, LLC confirmation, EIN, bank account, Stripe activation. I set deadlines for each task and stared at the board until it stopped looking aspirational and started looking like instructions. The silence became my workspace in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not just the literal quiet of working alone, but the absence of input, of opinions, of people telling me what was possible or smart or scalable. I worked in coffee shops with noise-canceling headphones, in co-working spaces where no one knew my name, in libraries during off-peak hours when the only sound was the hum of overhead lights and the click of my keyboard. Never my apartment. He knew the address, knew the building, and I couldn't risk him showing up unannounced with advice or concern or whatever he'd call the urge to manage what I was doing. I told no one. Not friends, not former coworkers, not the college roommate who'd always said I should start my own thing. Silence wasn't secrecy, it was strategy. Every person I told was a potential leak, a chance for someone to mention it at a networking event or in a Slack DM or over drinks with someone who knew someone who'd tell him. And I needed him not to know. Not yet. Not until I had something undeniable, something that couldn't be dismissed as cute or unscalable or a feature pretending to be a product. If you've ever rebuilt yourself in secret, you know the feeling, the weight of carrying a plan no one else can see, the discipline of showing up to something that doesn't exist yet except in your head and your Notion board and the lines of code you write at midnight. You know what it's like to bet on yourself when the scoreboard is still blank. And if you've done it, I want to hear about it. Comment the one thing you did that no one saw coming, the move that made people realize you were playing a different game. I updated the Notion board every night before bed. Checked off tasks. Added new ones. Watched the progress bars fill in with a satisfaction that felt small and enormous at the same time. The LLC approval came back in 9 days. The bank account activated 2 days after that. The Stripe account went live on day 14, and I tested it with a $1 charge to my own credit card just to see the dashboard populate with a transaction. He was still posting about his Series A. Still doing podcast interviews about what we've built. Still hiring and announcing and performing for an audience that didn't know the product they were celebrating had been built by someone who wasn't in the photo. I wasn't in the photo anymore. I was in coffee shops and libraries and co-working spaces, building in the margins he'd never thought to look. The sprint had begun. 76 days until the non-compete expired. 76 days to turn silence into proof. The sprint wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets and cold emails and nights where I fell asleep with my laptop still open, the screen dimmed to preserve battery, my neck cramped from hours hunched over a table at whatever coffee shop had the fewest people who might ask what I was working on. Week 1, Outreach. I pulled the list of 200 names I'd compiled during the research phase, operations managers, workflow leads, people who'd expressed frustration with the exact problem I was solving. I crafted a single cold email template, personalized the first line for each recipient, and hit send on all 200 over the course of 4 days. Subject line, quick question about your workflow automation. No pitch. No ask. Just a question that acknowledged I'd done my homework and understood their pain point. 43 people replied. I have the screenshots saved in a folder labeled Week 1 Validation, organized by response type. 29 said some version of, yes, this is a problem. 11 asked follow-up questions. 3 forwarded my email to colleagues. I replied to every single one within 2 hours, offering a free pilot in exchange for feedback. 12 said yes. Those 12 became my beta testers, and I treated them like they'd invested $1 million. I set up individual onboarding calls, built a shared Slack channel, sent weekly updates on what I was shipping and why. I wanted their opinions, but more than that, I wanted their testimonials, the kind of specific, credible praise that would make future customers believe this was real. By week 4, I had 5 testimonials I could screenshot and use. Jennifer, an ops lead at a logistics company, this solved the one workflow issue that's been eating 8 hours of my week. I'd pay for this today. Marcus, a project manager at a mid-sized agency, I tried 3 other tools. This is the only one that actually works the way I think. And then the one that made my chest tighten, I tried, his company name, first, but it was too complicated. This is what I needed all along. I read that last one 3 times. She'd tried his product. His product had failed her. And mine hadn't. Week 5, I hired a contract developer. I couldn't build fast enough on my own, not if I wanted to ship a real V1 before the non-compete expired. I posted on Upwork with a tight brief: need a senior full-stack dev for a 4-week sprint. React, Node, PostgreSQL. Must be comfortable with tight timelines and minimal hand-holding. I interviewed 6 candidates, hired someone with a 5-star rating and a portfolio that included 2 SaaS products I recognized, and negotiated a flat rate of $4,200, paid in 2 installments. The money hurt. My savings account, which had started at $8,000, now sat at just under $3,000 after the LLC filing, the domain, the developer deposit. But hiring him bought me time, and time was the resource I couldn't manufacture. He worked fast, asked smart questions, and delivered clean code. By week 8, we'd shipped V1, a stripped-down, functional product that did exactly one thing, but did it better than anything else on the market. That was the contrast I leaned into. His product tried to do everything: workflow automation, project management, reporting, integrations with 15 different platforms. It was feature bloat dressed up as enterprise-ready. Mine did one workflow, the one he'd ignored, the one every ops person I'd talked to said they needed. Laser focus versus Swiss Army knife chaos. His product required a manual and a sales demo. Mine had a 5-minute setup and a single use case you could explain in 1 sentence. Week 9, the first paying customer. Not a beta tester, not someone I'd cold emailed, but an inbound lead who'd found my landing page through organic search. She signed up for the $297 per month tier, and I watched the Stripe notification come through on my phone while I was sitting in a library, and I had to leave the building because I couldn't trust myself not to cry in public. $297 a month. $35.64 a year. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof that someone who didn't know me, who hadn't been convinced by a pitch or a favor, thought the thing I'd built was worth paying for. The second customer came 3 days later. Then the 5th, a week after that. By week 12, I had 11 paying customers, all on the same tier, all monthly contracts. MRR, monthly recurring revenue, the metric every SaaS founder watches like a heartbeat, was $32.67. Still not enough to quit a job, if I'd had one. But enough to know this wasn't a fluke. I tracked everything. The conversion rate from landing page visit to trial sign-up, 11%. Trial to paid, 19%. Churn, 0, so far, though I knew that wouldn't last. Average customer acquisition cost, $43, mostly from the Google Ads experiment I'd run in week 10 with a $200 budget. I built a dashboard in Google Sheets that updated in real time, and I checked it compulsively, the way you check your bank account after a large purchase to make sure the money cleared. Week 11, the pattern interrupt. I'd been lurking in an industry forum for workflow automation, one of those niche communities where ops people complain about tools and share hacks. I created a burner account, no real name, no identifiable details, and posted a simple question: has anyone found a tool that actually solves specific workflow problem? I've tried competitor A and his company name, but they're both overkill for what I need. The thread exploded. 68 comments in 3 days. Half were people venting about the same problem. A quarter were suggestions for tools that didn't actually solve it. And then someone, username WorkflowQueen47, replied, "There's this new thing I just started using, I think it's still in beta but it's exactly what you described. Let me find the link." She posted my landing page URL. 3 people replied saying they'd just signed up. Someone else asked if I was affiliated with the tool, which I wasn't, technically, since I was posting anonymously. Another person said they'd tried his platform and gave up after the 3rd tutorial video. The silence I'd built in, the decision not to announce, not to promote, not to make noise, was breaking in the best possible way. People were finding me. Recommending me. Comparing me, favorably, to the product I used to build. I didn't reply in the thread. I just watched it grow, screenshotting every comment, saving them in the same folder as the beta testimonials. Proof, stacking on proof, that the market I'd seen was real and the solution I'd built was the one people had been waiting for. By day 90, I had 14 paying customers, $41.98 in MRR, and a product that worked without me touching it every day. The non-compete had 7 days left. The silence had been strategic, but it was almost time to make some noise. He found me on day 103. I know because I check my Google Analytics obsessively, the way you check your phone after sending a risky text, and I saw the referral traffic spike from a domain I recognized, his company's internal Slack workspace, the one that leaked URLs into browser metadata when employees clicked links during work hours. Someone at his company had found my landing page. And given the timestamp, 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, right in the middle of when he used to schedule his strategic thinking blocks, I had a pretty good guess who. The Google alert probably tipped him off. I'd optimized my site for the exact long-tail keywords his product ranked for, the ones that mattered: workflow automation for operations teams, task handoff software for agencies, process management without complexity. I'd spent hours on SEO, studying his site structure, finding the gaps in his content strategy, building landing pages that answered the questions his marketing team had ignored. By month 4, I outranked him for 2 of those terms. Not on page 1 versus page 2, I was result 3, he was result 7. On the same page. Close enough that anyone comparing solutions would see both of us. The LinkedIn message came 4 hours after the Slack referral hit my analytics. I was at a co-working space in a neighborhood he'd never visit, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, when the notification popped up on my phone. Hey! Saw your thing. Looks interesting. We should catch up, would love to hear what you've been working on. I read it 3 times, parsing the tone. The exclamation point after, hey, was trying too hard. Your thing was dismissive in a way that pretended to be casual. We should catch up, implied I owed him a conversation, that the 3 years I'd spent building his product and the boardroom where he'd killed mine had earned him access to my time. The message was friendly in the way a competitor's smile is friendly, all teeth, no warmth. I typed 1 word and hit send, busy. No punctuation. No elaboration. No, thanks for reaching out, or maybe later, or any of the softening phrases women are trained to deploy so we don't seem rude. Just the truth. I was busy. And he didn't deserve more than that. I didn't block him. That's important. Blocking him would have been satisfying in the moment, but it would have also cut off my ability to see what he was doing, how he was reacting, whether he was taking me seriously or still treating this like a side project he could absorb or dismiss. I wanted him to watch. I wanted him to see my product show up in his keyword reports, my customer count grow, my site climb the rankings. I wanted him to feel the way I'd felt in that boardroom, realizing too late that the thing he'd underestimated was already moving without his permission. The silence I'd built into the last 4 months was shifting. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was positioning. Every customer I signed, every forum thread where someone recommended my tool over his, every search result where my site appeared above his was a kind of visibility that didn't require my voice. The product was speaking for me, louder than any pitch I could have made. By the end of month 4, I had 28 paying customers. My MRR hit $8,400, not enough to make me rich, but enough to prove this was more than a feature, more than something he could have bolted onto his platform in Q3 if he'd had bandwidth. It was a business. It was working. And it was competing with his in the exact market he told me wasn't big enough. He didn't reply to my busy message. The read receipt showed up, those little check marks that confirmed he'd seen it, but no follow-up. No worries, or let me know when you have time. Just silence on his end, the same silence I'd given him when I walked out of his office after he'd killed the project. 11 days passed. I didn't check his LinkedIn profile, didn't search for his company name, didn't let myself obsess over whether he was thinking about me or had already forgotten. I had customers to onboard, features to ship, a roadmap that extended 6 months into the future. His opinion had stopped being the variable that determined whether I kept going. But I kept the analytics tab open, and on day 114, I saw another referral from his company's Slack workspace. Different timestamp, different IP address. This time, the session lasted 8 minutes. Someone wasn't just glancing at my landing page, they were reading it, clicking through to the pricing page, maybe even starting a trial sign-up. I pulled up a tool that tracked email forwards and link shares, the kind of light surveillance that's legal and common in SaaS. Someone had forwarded my landing page URL from his domain to another email address at his domain. The subject line wasn't visible, but the metadata was. Sent at 3:42 p.m. Opened at 3:44 p.m. Clicked at 3:46 p.m. I didn't need to see the subject line to know what it said. I imagined him typing it to his co-founder, the same co-founder whose name was on the Series A term sheet, the same co-founder who probably didn't know I existed or that I'd built the MVP that got them funded. The subject line would have been something like, "This looks familiar," or "FYI," or "Thoughts." The kind of message you send when you're not panicking yet but you're starting to pay attention. The read receipt on my busy message stayed at 11 days. He didn't reach out again. But the silence between us was no longer empty, it was waiting, the way the air waits before a storm, heavy with the knowledge that something's coming and neither of you can stop it. The cease and desist arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered via certified mail to the registered address on my LLC filing, a virtual mailbox service I'd set up specifically to avoid giving out my home address. The envelope was thick, the kind of thick that signals lawyers have been billing hours, and the return address belonged to a firm I recognized from tech industry news, the kind that represents Series A startups who need to look serious. I opened it standing in the mailbox store's parking lot, and the first page made my hands shake in a way I hadn't expected. Notice of intellectual property infringement and demand to cease and desist. The allegations were precise and terrifying: misappropriation of trade secrets, breach of confidentiality obligations under my employment agreement, unauthorized use of proprietary methodologies, violation of non-compete provisions. They were claiming I'd stolen his company's intellectual property to build a competing product, and they were demanding I shut down immediately and turn over all customer data, code repositories, and financial records within 7 business days. But tucked inside the legal letterhead, clipped to page 4 with a standard metal binder clip, was a handwritten note on his personal stationery. The handwriting was the same as the birthday card he'd given me 2 years earlier, back when we were still pretending we were friends. "I'm just protecting what we built together. This doesn't have to get ugly. Call me." The "we" was the part that made me sit down on the curb, envelope still in my hands. He genuinely believed it. That the product I'd built on my own time, with my own savings, using none of his company's resources, was somehow ours. That my idea, the one he'd called not scalable and killed in a 15-minute meeting, belonged to him because I'd once worked for him. He'd never seen me as separate. I'd always been an extension of his vision, his execution arm, his right hand. And now that the hand was building something without him, he wanted it back. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not the kind of lawyer who advertises on billboards, but the kind who specializes in startup disputes and charges $350 an hour. Her name was Sarah, and her intake questions were sharp and efficient. "Did you sign an NDA? Did you use any company resources? Do you have documentation proving independent development?" Yes to the first. No to the second. Absolutely to the third. The retainer was $2,500, paid via wire transfer that took 2 business days to clear from my rapidly depleting savings account. The response window was 14 days under the legal standard, but Sarah said we could buy an extension if we needed it by acknowledging receipt and requesting time to gather documentation. We didn't need it. I had everything. The Git commits were time-stamped. Every line of code I'd written, every feature I'd shipped, every bug I'd fixed, all tracked in a private repository with commit messages and dates that proved I'd started development 3 weeks after I quit his company, well after my final day of employment. The original pitch deck was saved in a folder labeled Pitch, Do Not Delete, the same deck I'd presented in that boardroom, the one with my name in the footer and a creation date 6 months before I'd joined his company. And the email, the one where I'd asked him to reconsider killing the project and he'd replied, "We're passing on this. Not our roadmap. Feel free to explore it on your own time if you want. Feel free to explore it on your own time." I'd screenshotted that email the day I received it and saved it in 3 places. At the time, I'd thought I was being paranoid. Turns out I was being prepared. Sarah drafted a response that was colder than anything I could have written. It included exhibits: Exhibit A, the time-stamped Git repository log. Exhibit B, the original pitch deck with metadata proving it predated my employment. Exhibit C, his email explicitly declining the project and granting implicit permission for independent development. Exhibit D, proof that I'd used zero company resources, my own laptop, my own AWS account, my own domain registration. The letter concluded with a polite suggestion that further unfounded allegations could constitute harassment and that we reserved the right to pursue claims for damages if this continued. We sent it on day 9. Certified mail, same firm, same theatrics. I didn't include a handwritten note. The legal noise had consequences I hadn't anticipated. One of my beta clients, a small agency that had been with me since week 3, emailed to say they were pausing their subscription. Nothing personal, the email read. Our legal team just flagged the C&E news and we can't risk being caught in a dispute. If this clears up, we'd love to come back. I refunded their last month and marked them as churned in my spreadsheet. 28 customers down to 27. My MR dropped from $8,400 to $8,103. It was a small friction, but it stung in a way the legal threat hadn't. I could fight him in court if I had to. I couldn't fight the fear his tactics created, the way legal language makes people nervous even when you've done nothing wrong. The journalist's email arrived the same week, subject line, story idea, stealth competitors. She'd seen the forum thread, the one where my product had been recommended anonymously, and she'd done some digging. I'm working on a piece about bootstrapped founders who are quietly disrupting established players in their space. Your story seems like a perfect fit. Former employee builds competing product, outranks original company on key search terms, does it all without funding. Would you be open to a conversation? I read the email 4 times, cursor hovering over the reply button. The visibility would be good. The credibility would be even better. But the timing was terrible. His legal team was already claiming I was stealing his IP. The last thing I needed was a journalist writing about how I'd left his company and built a competitor. It would look like revenge, not resolution. It would give him ammunition. I typed a short reply, "Thank you for thinking of me. I'm not ready to go on record yet, but I'd love to revisit this in a few months if the offer still stands." Professional. Non-committal. Leaving the door open without walking through it. She replied within an hour, "Totally understand. I'll check back in Q3. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is exactly the kind of story people need to hear. Good luck." I saved her email in a folder labeled Future. The legal fight was still unfolding, and I didn't know yet whether I'd win or whether he'd escalate. But I knew one thing with certainty: he tried to crush me with lawyers and letterhead and the weight of a firm that charged more per hour than I paid myself per month, and I'd met him with receipts. Time-stamped, documented, irrefutable receipts. The silence I'd built into my strategy was shifting again. Not into noise, not yet. But into something sharper. Into proof that I didn't just have an idea, I had a paper trail, a product, and a future he couldn't claim as his own. He asked to meet in person, and I said yes. Not because I owed him the conversation, but because I wanted to see his face when he realized the dynamic had shifted in ways he hadn't prepared for. The location was my choice this time. Same building where he'd killed my project 6 months earlier, but different floor, the co-working space I'd been using since month 2, the one with the glass-walled conference rooms and the membership that cost me $249 a month. I booked the room for an hour. Sent him the address. Told him to check in at the front desk under my company name, not his. He arrived 7 minutes late, which I clocked because punctuality had always been his thing back when I worked for him, back when he'd start meetings at exactly 9 a.m. and make people who showed up at 9:02 feel like they'd missed something critical. He looked the same quarter zip, same laptop bag, same posture that took up more space than necessary, but there was something in his face that wasn't there before. Tightness around his eyes. The smile he gave me when he walked in didn't reach past his teeth. "Thanks for meeting," he said, setting his bag down and sitting across from me like we were old colleagues catching up over coffee. "I know things have been complicated." Complicated. That was one word for it. I didn't reply, just waited, hands folded on the table, the same fake wood laminate that had been cold under my palms 6 months earlier in a different room on a different floor. The silence stretched. He filled it. "Look, I'm going to be direct. I made a mistake." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the posture of someone who's practiced this conversation. "I should have listened when you pitched the idea. I should have seen what you were building. And I think there's a way we can fix this, together." Together. That word again. "I want to bring you back," he continued. "VP of Product. Real equity this time, 2%, vesting over 4 years. You'd own the roadmap, report directly to me, have a seat at the table for all the big decisions. We could integrate what you've built into our platform, scale it the right way, with real resources. You've proven the concept. Now let's make it into something that actually changes the market." I let the offer sit in the air between us, the same way his laugh had sat in the hallway 6 months ago, and I watched him watch me, waiting for gratitude or relief or some sign that I was considering it. I wasn't. "No," I said. One word, same as the LinkedIn message. Clean. Final. His face shifted, not anger, not yet, but confusion, like I'd answered a math problem wrong and he needed to walk me through the solution. "Okay. I get it. You want more equity. We can negotiate. 3%. Maybe 3.5 if you're full-time and we hit our Q3 targets." "I don't want equity in your company," I said, and I kept my voice level, calm, the way you'd correct a fact in a meeting. "I want to keep building mine." He sat back, recalibrating. The desperation was showing now, subtle but visible, in the way he adjusted his posture, in the pause before his next sentence. "Then let's talk acquisition. Acqui-hire. We buy your company, you bring your customers and your tech, you get a seat on the board and a cash payout. $150K, plus the board seat, plus equity. You walk away clean, no legal battles, no competing in the same space. We both win." I reached into the folder I'd brought and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a term sheet I'd drafted the night before, printed on plain white paper, no letterhead, no lawyer signatures. Just a proposal, typed in 12-point font, clean and professional. "Here's my offer," I said. He picked it up, scanned it, and his expression went from confusion to disbelief to something I couldn't quite name. "You want to buy my customer list? For $1. Contingent on one condition," I said, leaning forward slightly, mirroring the posture he'd used to deliver his offers. "You admit, in writing, that the idea you killed in that boardroom 6 months ago was viable. That the market existed. That the solution worked. And that you were wrong." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, loaded with the weight of everything unsaid between us, the nights I'd spent building his MVP, the term sheet I'd been excluded from, the cease and desist his lawyers had sent, the handwritten note claiming, "we," when there had never been a we. The silence was the same one that had followed his laugh, the one that had made me realize I'd been pitching to the wrong person. Except now I wasn't pitching. I was offering terms. And he was the one holding a piece of paper that required him to admit he'd been wrong. He put the term sheet down, slowly, like it might burn him if he held it too long. "This is this isn't how acquisitions work. I know, I said. That's not a real offer. It's a point. You wanted to buy me out because it's easier than competing with me. But I don't need your money. I don't need your board seat. I don't need you to validate my idea anymore, because the market already did. 27 paying customers did. 8,000 in Mar did. The fact that I outrank you on Google did. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then why are we here? Why did you agree to meet if you're not interested in any deal? Because I wanted you to ask me that question, I said. And I let the silence return, the same fluorescent hum above us, the same cold table between us, except this time I was the one who decided when the meeting was over. He asked it anyway. Why are you doing this? I'd thought about this answer for weeks, rehearsed it in the shower and on long walks and in the moments before sleep when your brain won't let you rest. I'd considered saying it was about revenge, about proving him wrong, about showing him what he'd missed. But none of those were true, or at least not the whole truth. Because you taught me something, I said. You taught me that no one will believe in my ideas unless I prove them first. Not you, not investors, not customers. Just me. And I needed to hear that, even if you didn't mean it the way I took it. So thank you. He stared at me, and for the first time in the conversation, I saw something that looked almost like respect, or maybe just exhaustion. My investors are asking questions, he said quietly, and it sounded like a confession. They saw your site. They saw the forum threads. They're asking why a bootstrapped competitor is growing faster than we are in a market I told them wasn't big enough for multiple players. I don't have a good answer. That was the loop closing, the question he'd carried into this meeting, the reason he'd offered me equity and board seats and acquisition deals. He wasn't trying to crush me anymore. He was trying to contain me. And he'd just admitted he couldn't. You should tell them the truth, I said, standing up and gathering my folder. The market's bigger than you thought. The solution works. And the competitor they're worried about used to work for you, but she doesn't anymore. I left the term sheet on the table. He didn't take it with him when he left 3 minutes later, but I saw him photograph it with his phone before he walked out, and I wondered if he'd show it to his co-founder or his investors or just keep it as a reminder of the meeting where he'd offered me everything I used to want and I'd said no. The silence in the room after he left felt different than the silence in the hallway 6 months ago. Not hollow. Not waiting. Just mine. The meeting ended, but the decisions were just beginning. I walked out of that conference room knowing I'd said no to the easy path, the equity, the board seat, the acquisition that would have let me cash out and call it a win. But easy wasn't the same as right, and I didn't build this company to hand it back to someone who'd never believed in it. Month 7 became the month of boundaries. The first one was digital. I blocked him on LinkedIn. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. Every time his profile appeared in my "People You May Know" sidebar or his company showed up in my news feed, it pulled my attention backward when I needed it focused forward. The block was clean, permanent, and required exactly 3 clicks. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a message explaining why. I just removed his access to my professional life the same way he'd removed my equity from his cap table. The second boundary was physical. I gave notice at the co-working space, the one in the building where we'd met, where he now knew I worked, and found a new one across town. It cost $30 more per month, but it had better internet and a quieter focus room and 0 memories of his face across a conference table. I moved my setup in one trip: laptop, charger, the USB drive that started everything, and a framed screenshot of my first paying customer's sign-up confirmation. The new desk faced a window. The old one had faced a wall. The third boundary was strategic. I stopped checking. Stopped refreshing his company's Twitter account to see what they were announcing. Stopped searching his name to see if he'd written a Medium post about the lessons learned from our conversation. Stopped clicking on his product updates to see if they were copying my features, which I knew they were because two of my beta testers had forwarded me screenshots of his roadmap and it looked like a mirror of mine, just 6 months delayed. Let him copy. I was already 2 quarters ahead. The angel check came from the last person I expected, a founder in his network, someone he'd introduced me to back when I was still his right hand, back when my execution made him look good. Her name was Priya, and she'd built and sold a B2B SaaS company 3 years earlier for 8 figures. She reached out via email 2 weeks after the conference room meeting with a subject line that made me read it twice. I heard you said no. We met for coffee. She'd heard about the meeting through the founder grapevine, the way news travels in tight networks when someone makes an unexpected move. I respect the hell out of what you did, she said, stirring oat milk into her latte. Most people would have taken the board seat and called it a win. You chose to keep building. That tells me everything I need to know about your long-term thinking. She wrote a check for $50,000. Not a loan, not a convertible note with clauses that would dilute me later, but a clean angel investment at a valuation I proposed and she accepted without negotiation. The poetic justice wasn't lost on me, his network, his contact, his introduction, now funding the competitor he'd tried to acquire. The money hit my business account 6 days later, and I used it to hire my first full-time employee. Her name was Alexis. She'd been a contractor for 3 months, handling customer support and onboarding while I focused on product and growth, and she was good, fast, empathetic, detail-oriented in ways I wasn't. I offered her $60,000 a year plus equity, and she said yes before I finished explaining the benefits package. Having someone else on payroll changed the rhythm of the company. It wasn't just me anymore, working in silence, carrying every decision. It was a team. Small, but real. By the end of month 7, we were at 18,000 in MRR. 60 customers, most on the $297 per month tier, a handful on the higher tier I'd introduced in month 6 for teams that needed advanced features. The revenue was real, recurring, growing at a rate that made my spreadsheets look less like hope and more like a plan. But I was still paying myself $3,000 a month, barely enough to cover rent and groceries and the student loans I'd been deferring since I quit his company. Sustainability over ego. That was the rule I'd set for myself back in month 1, and I wasn't breaking it just because the numbers looked good on a dashboard. I'd seen too many founders pay themselves too much too early, burn through runway, and crash when growth slowed. I wanted to build something that lasted, not something that looked impressive on LinkedIn for 6 months before it died. The journalist reached out again. Same subject line as before, story idea, stealth competitors. But this time, the timing was different. The legal threat had been resolved, his lawyers had quietly dropped the cease and desist after my response, no apology, no acknowledgement, just silence that meant we'd won. The product was stable. The revenue was growing. And I had something to say that people might actually want to hear. I replied, yes. Let's talk. But I need the piece embargoed until September, I want to time it with a product launch I'm planning. She agreed. We scheduled a call for the following week, and I started drafting the narrative I wanted to tell, not a revenge story, but a resolution story. Not about how he'd wronged me, but about what I'd built in the silence after he said no. The app hit number 3 on Product Hunt on a Tuesday morning in late July. I hadn't planned a big launch, just posted it with a simple tagline, workflow automation for teams who don't want complexity, and a 30-second demo video I'd recorded on my phone. The upvotes came fast, 20 in the first hour, 50 by lunchtime, 212 by end of day. Number 3 in the productivity tools category, behind 2 venture-backed startups with marketing teams and ad budgets I couldn't touch. But I didn't need to touch them. The product spoke for itself. The comment section filled with testimonials from users I'd never met, people who'd found my tool through search or word of mouth and decided it solved a problem they'd been living with for months. Finally, something that just works. This is what, his company name, should have been. Bootstrapped and better than the funded competition. I screenshotted the product hunt page and saved it in the same folder as the beta testimonials and the first paying customer confirmation and the git commit logs I'd sent to the lawyer. Receipts, stacking on receipts, proving that the thing I'd built in silence was louder than any pitch I could have made. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone who underestimated you? Not the kind of boundary that's about anger or revenge, but the kind that's about protecting what you've built and choosing your own path even when the easy path is right there, waiting, offering equity and board seats and validation you used to think you needed. If you've done that, if you've walked away from the offer because you knew your work was worth more than someone else's approval, drop a fire emoji. Because that's the boundary that changes everything. The silence I'd built into my strategy was no longer about stealth. It was about power, the power to stop checking what he was doing, stop measuring my success against his, stop needing his validation or his network or his version of what scalable meant. I was building my own definition, and it didn't require his permission. Month 8 was starting. The roadmap extended into next year. I glanced at the USB drive in its frame, the artifact of silence before the build, and then turned back to my screen. The roadmap was open. The customers were waiting. And the fluorescent hum from that first boardroom was just a memory now, distant and quiet, belonging to a version of me who didn't know yet that the only permission she needed was her own. The article went live on a Wednesday in September, 12 months to the day after I'd walked out of that boardroom holding a USB drive and a decision I hadn't fully understood yet. The headline was better than I'd hoped: how one founder turned rejection into a $250,000 ARR competitor. The journalist had done her homework, interviewed 3 of my customers, pulled revenue data I'd verified, and framed the story not as David versus Goliath but as competence versus noise, focus versus feature bloat, silence versus performance. The article didn't mention his name, but anyone in the industry would know. The clues were there: the Series A he'd raised, the product category we both occupied, the fact that a former employee had built a faster-growing competitor in less time with a fraction of the resources. By noon, my inbox had 17 new messages. By end of day, 43. Press requests, podcast invitations, investors I'd never heard of asking if I was raising a round. And one message from his company's head of partnerships, subject line: collaboration opportunity. I read it twice. The tone was professional, borderline warm, suggesting we explore synergies between our platforms and see if there was a way to work together instead of in parallel. The subtext was clear: they wanted to partner because they couldn't compete. Or maybe because his investors had read the article and asked questions he didn't have good answers for. I archived the email without responding. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I'd spent 12 months building something that didn't need his approval, his network, or his partnership to succeed. Tabling the offer wasn't about revenge, it was about recognizing that the narrative had shifted so completely that his outreach felt irrelevant, a relic of a dynamic that no longer existed. The person who'd walked into that boardroom a year ago had needed his validation. She believed that if she could just explain the idea clearly enough, show the research thoroughly enough, prove the market convincingly enough, he'd see what she saw and give her permission to build it. That person had been operating under the assumption that belief required external confirmation, that vision needed a cosigner. The founder I'd become didn't operate under those assumptions anymore. By month 12, I was at $253,000 in annual recurring revenue. 84 paying customers, 2 full-time employees, and a roadmap that extended 18 months into the future. I was paying myself $4,800 a month now, still modest, still sustainable, but enough to stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. The company had a rhythm: product updates every 2 weeks, customer check-ins every month, quarterly planning sessions where Alexis and I mapped out features and priorities and growth targets that felt ambitious but achievable. I'd started speaking at conferences. Small ones at first, regional events for operations professionals, niche gatherings where people cared more about solving problems than hearing from celebrity founders. But the talks went well. People asked smart questions, lingered afterward to exchange contact information, and followed up weeks later to say they'd signed up for the product after hearing me speak. By November, I had an invitation to keynote a mid-sized SaaS conference in Austin, the kind of stage I used to watch from the audience and wonder if I'd ever be the person holding the microphone. The acquisition offers started coming in month 10. Not acqui-hires, not board seats with equity packages designed to keep me quiet, real acquisition offers from companies that saw what I'd built and wanted to buy it outright. The first was $750,000, all cash, from a competitor I respected. I declined politely. The second was $1.2 million, half cash and half stock, from a larger platform that wanted to integrate my workflow solution into their ecosystem. That one I was still considering, not because I needed the money but because the timing might make sense if I wanted to start something new. I hadn't decided yet. The luxury of choice felt almost surreal compared to the urgency of 12 months ago, when $8,000 in savings and a non-compete clause had felt like the only variables that mattered. The USB drive sat on my desk now, framed in a shadow box with a small plaque underneath, Phase 1, January 2024. I'd moved it from my laptop bag to the frame in month 8, after the Product Hunt launch, when it felt less like a prototype and more like a monument to the silence I'd carried before I knew what I was building. The drive didn't work anymore. I'd accidentally corrupted it trying to pull an old file in month 6, but the artifact wasn't about functionality. It was about memory. About the moment when belief was just me and a piece of plastic and the decision to start even when no one else was watching. He'd laughed at my idea. That was the truth, the inciting incident, the wound that had driven me to build this company in secret and prove it could work without him. But the other truth, the one that mattered more now, was that I didn't need him to stop laughing. I needed to stop waiting for his permission. I needed to stop believing that my ideas required validation from someone who'd never see me as more than his right hand, his executor, his employee. The shift wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in the conference room when I slid that term sheet across the table or in the journalist's article when she called me a founder instead of a former employee. It happened in the quiet accumulation of decisions I made without asking anyone if they were the right ones. It happened in the spreadsheets I built at midnight, the customers I onboarded without a sales team, the boundaries I set without apologizing for them. I was pitching a new idea last week. Not to him, not to investors, but to my team, Alexis and the developer I'd hired in month 9 and the part-time marketer who'd joined in month 11. We were sitting in the conference room at the new co-working space, the one with the window and the better internet, and I was walking them through a feature concept I'd been prototyping for 3 weeks. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, the kind of thing that would require us to rebuild part of the core architecture and delay other priorities. Alexis asked the question I used to dread, is this scalable? I didn't hesitate. I think so. But let me show you the data. I walked them through the research, the user interviews, the market analysis that showed demand for this exact workflow. I showed them the prototype, the technical feasibility assessment, the timeline that accounted for risks and dependencies. And then I asked them what they thought, not because I needed their permission but because their input would make the idea better. We decided to build it. Together. And this time, I was the one who got to decide what scalable meant. The Series seed was in progress. I'd started conversations with 3 investors in November, all of whom had reached out after the article, all of whom understood that I wasn't raising because I needed to but because the right capital at the right time could accelerate growth I'd already proven was real. The term sheets would come in January. The next chapter was mine to write, and for the first time in my career, I wasn't writing it in someone else's margins.